At family dinner, my sister mocked me. "Where's your husband and kids?" "Oh, right. You don't have any." My parents laughed, so I said, "Where's your money?" "Oh, right. I've been supporting you until today." The table went silent, and that was the night everything changed. Welcome to Martha's Stories. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Now let's jump back into my story. I'm sure you'll love it if you keep listening till the end. Hi, my name is Olivia Hart, 31 years old, living in Seattle, Washington. And every day of mine begins like the ringing of a repetitive alarm clock. Waking up in my small apartment in Capitol Hill, drinking black coffee with no sugar, then rushing to catch the morning bus to the tech company where I work as a product manager. I never claimed to live a perfect life, but I am proud that I built a stable path with my own strength. I live below my means, rarely indulge in luxury shopping, and never spend recklessly. Even the apartment I rent is modest, just enough for me to call home. The reason is simple. Most of my paycheck never stays long in my account. It quickly flows toward my family, the black hole I have become so familiar with that I no longer question it. My mother, Evelyn, a retired nurse after an early heart surgery, still needs medications, checkups, and the constant costs that come with them, and I am always the one who pays. My father, Robert, once worked as a consultant, but contracts came and went, and during the lean months, I was the daughter wiring money to keep the suburban Tacoma house from the bank's watchful eye. And then there is Savannah, my younger sister, 28, youthful, beautiful, adored by the family, and also the one I have rescued countless times when she dropped out of school, fell behind on rent, or recklessly maxed out her credit cards. I never thought of myself as the one carrying the weight, but looking back, every scramble and transfer feels like a silent resume, clearly stating my role in the family. The safety net. I am not wealthy, only comfortable enough if I did not have to share the burden. A steady salary in tech could allow me to travel, buy a small apartment, or at least save for the future. But I rarely did any of that. The trips I dreamed of, a summer in Italy, a week skiing in Colorado, were always canceled after a frantic phone call from my mother, or a panicked message from Savannah. I kept telling myself this was what a daughter, what a sister should do. I silently sacrificed, tucking away my own desires into a locked drawer and kept sending the money. That is why, on that Sunday evening, I still drove nearly an hour from Seattle back to the old house in Tacoma. Family dinner, a tradition my mother had kept for years, was usually nothing special. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, sometimes a soup she was proud of. When I walked in, the house looked the same as always. The warm glow of yellow lights, the familiar hint of coffee in the air, and the slow murmur of a football game on the living room TV. Yet beneath that coziness, I could sense another layer, thin but tense, like a violin string pulled too tight, waiting for the lightest touch to snap. Savannah sat at the table, her blonde hair tied high, her bright eyes gleaming with confidence, while my parents murmured quietly to each other. I set my coat on the chair and smiled, though the smile felt strained. Over the years, I had begun to notice an undeniable divide. Me, the daughter who quietly sacrificed, and Savannah, the daughter who was indulged and praised, as if the family's entire light shone only in her direction. I told myself I was not jealous, or at least I tried to. But deep down, the crack widened with every passing day. As I sat down, I listened to my mother talk about her week, about how Savannah had been invited to a fashion event in downtown Seattle, about how my father was still trying to make things work with his occasional consulting jobs. I nodded, added a few polite words, but in my mind, every bill, every transfer, every dollar of my savings, swept away like wind, kept flashing before me, haunting me like familiar ghosts. That dinner, outwardly warm and ordinary, carried inside at a weight so suffocating I could hardly breathe. Savannah swirled the glass of wine in her hand, the warm dining room light catching her eyes and making them glimmer with something mischievous. I had just lifted a spoonful of soup to my lips when she tilted her head, her mouth curling into that familiar half-smile that had irritated me since we were children. "So, sis," Savannah drawled, feigning a gentle kind of concern. "Where's your husband? Where are your kids? Oh, right. You don't have any." She let out a soft laugh, then casually sipped her wine as if she had just delivered a brilliant joke. My mother immediately joined in with a light laugh, loud enough for me to hear the contempt tucked beneath it. My father gave a quiet snort, his eyes glinting with agreement, while Savannah leaned back in her chair as though she had just scored a point in a game only she cared about. I sat there, the spoons still hovering mid-air, forcing my face to remain still. In that brief moment, memories crashed over me like a storm. All the times I had set aside my own needs to clean up my family's crisis. I remembered the winter night my mother was rushed to the hospital with chest pains. How I missed the most important meeting of my career just to sign insurance papers and put down the surgical deposit. I remembered when my father fell behind on the mortgage and I emptied the savings I had set aside for my dream apartment, even though I myself was crammed into a tiny rental in Seattle, with the rent climbing higher every year. I remembered when Savannah called me sobbing after being evicted from her downtown apartment, how I paid off all her debts and found her a new place to live. Every time I had done it in silence, without complaint, telling myself it was the duty of a daughter, the responsibility of an older sister. And now, what was I given in return? A mocking remark laid bare in front of the whole family, turning my life into the punchline of their joke. Something inside me cracked. It was not an explosion of rage, but a dense, icy silence, like glass splintering into tiny fractures that were bound to shatter soon. I took a deep breath, set my spoon down on the plate, and lifted my gaze directly at Savannah. She was still sitting there, smug, her eyes gleaming with the confidence of someone who believed she had just won. Slowly, I spoke, my voice so calm it surprised even me. "I may not have a husband or children, but where's your money? Oh, right. I'm still the one supporting you, until today." The room fell silent as though someone had flipped a switch and cut the sound. Savannah's smile froze, her eyes flashing with confusion before quickly hardening into anger. My mother set her fork down, the clatter of metal against porcelain slicing through the tense air. My father narrowed his eyes, leaning forward as if unsure he had heard correctly. I felt every pair of eyes fixed on me, but instead of lowering my head like I always had, I held their gaze steady and unflinching. In that moment, I thought of all the years I had lived like a shadow in this family. I was the good child, the studious one, the early worker, the daughter who never caused trouble. I had grown used to being ignored while the family gushed over Savannah's so-called achievements, from a high school fashion show to the part-time job she quit after only a few weeks. I had grown used to my mother's comparing glance. Other people's daughters are married with children and you. I had grown used to my father's tone. You may be good at earning money, but don't think you're better than anyone else. All those words, I swallowed them, turning them into fuel to work harder, to send home more money, clinging to the hope that one day I would be acknowledged. But that day never came. And now with Savannah openly turning my single life into the butt of a joke, with my parents joining in, I knew I had reached my limit. Savannah forced a laugh, trying to regain her air of superiority. "Oh, come on, sis. Why so serious? I was just joking." My mother quickly added, "You know how your sister is. Olivia? She just teases for fun. Don't take it to heart." My father cleared his throat and spoke in his usual commanding tone. "That's right. You're taking this too seriously. She's still young. You can't expect her to be responsible like you. Each word landed heavy, echoing in my head like nails being hammered into a coffin. You can't expect her to be responsible like you. That was the sentence they had stamped on me for years. I was the one who had to carry the weight, who had to sacrifice, who had to grow up for the whole family, while Savannah was allowed to fail, to drift carelessly, to mock the very person keeping her afloat. 7 years ago, Savannah decided to quit her university in Portland after only a year and a half. She called me one rainy afternoon, her voice trembling, saying she no longer had money for tuition or housing, that she had missed the payment deadline, and the school was holding her records. I remember sitting in my small Seattle apartment, staring at my bank account balance as my chest tightened. That money was what I had saved for 2 years, hoping to buy my very first car. Instead, I wired nearly $12,000 to her school to cover her debts and even added a few hundred more for her living expenses. When my mother asked, I simply said, "I've got it covered," and hung up, my heart aching, yet hopeful that Savannah would finally value the sacrifice. But just a few months later, she dropped out entirely, moved back home, and the money I had poured out was gone without a trace. Another time, one summer, I had planned a week-long vacation in California. I had booked plane tickets, found an Airbnb near Santa Monica Beach, and even bought a sea blue maxi dress just for the trip. It was supposed to be the first vacation I took for myself in years. But only 3 days before departure, my mother called in desperation. The old car she used to get to her part-time job had broken down badly, repairs costing nearly $4,000. I looked at the suitcase already packed, the confirmation emails for flights and lodging, and slowly deleted it all. The plane tickets carried cancellation fees. The Airbnb was non-refundable. I wired my mother the money, then returned to the office as if I had never planned to go anywhere. When coworkers asked why I wasn't taking my trip, I forced a thin smile. Change of plans. Inside, my craving to breathe in California's fresh air was crushed, replaced with a dull emptiness that lingered. But the memory that stings the most is tied to this house, the Tacoma home I once thought was a symbol of safety. My father had landed a big consulting contract, but within months, the client pulled out and the deal collapsed. The bank sent overdue mortgage warnings threatening foreclosure. I remember that night my mother sat crying in the kitchen. My father silent, saying nothing while Savannah shut herself away in her room. I quietly opened my laptop, logged into my savings account where I'd funneled every bonus, every extra hour of overtime. I wired over $15,000 to my father to cover the mortgage, saving the house from the bank's grasp. No one asked if I had enough left to live on. No one offered to repay me. They simply sighed in relief and slipped back into their routines as if my sacrifice was nothing more than expected. When I added it all up, I had spent tens of thousands of dollars over the course of 7 years. That money could have been the seed capital for my dream business, the down payment on a condo in Seattle, or at the very least the trips that would have allowed me to truly live out my youth. Instead, I sent it away without hesitation, lulling myself with the thought that it was my duty. And that very obedience had turned me into an endless supply line, leading to this moment at the dinner table, listening to my sister's mockery and my parents' laughter echoing in agreement. I began to realize the price I had paid was not just financial. I had sacrificed my youth. While my peers traveled the world, pushed themselves into new careers, bought homes, and started families, I buried myself in a loop, working, sending money, extinguishing other people's crises. I had even sacrificed love. At 28, I dated a good man named Daniel, an architect. He wanted to build a future with me, to buy a home together, to have children. But I turned him away because I knew I could not commit to a new life while my family still pulled me backward. I feared that one day the late-night calls and endless demands for money would shatter my own happiness. So I let Daniel go because I was too busy keeping the family afloat. Oh, how and what about my career? I worked hard. I was capable. But I never dared to leap to bigger companies or chase faster promotions because I always needed stability to ensure I could help out whenever my parents or Savannah needed. I chose the safe road, the one with fewer risks. But it also meant losing the chance to build something extraordinary. Every single thing I did, every choice I made revolved around my family, not myself. Sitting there, it became painfully clear. I had traded away my youth, my love, and my career in exchange for something that was never given recognition. And recognition never came. Instead, all I received was mockery. My hand trembled on the table, not from explosive anger, but from a bitter awakening. I had been exploited for far too long, and I was the one who had allowed it to happen. That night, I drove back from Tacoma to Seattle in silence. The I-5 highway was as busy as ever, but the rumble of trucks, the flashing lights, even the blaring horns seemed to slip right past me. Inside, the taunts and laughter of my parents and Savannah replayed endlessly as though someone were looping a cruel recording. When I reached my small apartment in Capitol Hill, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark listening to the ticking of the wall clock before slowly opening my laptop. The screen glowed, and in that cold light, I logged into my bank account. The number that appeared stunned me. I scrolled down. Each transfer, each transaction, lining up like a written indictment. $750 for Savannah's tuition, $3,200 for my mother's car repairs, $15,000 to cover my father's mortgage, $2,800 to pay off Savannah's credit card when she was threatened with a lawsuit. On and on it went. Dozens of small withdrawals and massive sums strung together. I clicked the filter to view annual summaries. Each year, I had lost at least $10,000 to $12,000 to my family. Over 7 years, the total was more than $80,000, enough to put a down payment on a condo in Seattle, enough to buy a brand new car, enough to enroll in the MBA program I once dreamed of. Instead, it had all dissolved into emergencies that would never be repaid. I sat still, my hand trembling on the computer mouse. Pain seeped through my body, a suffocating bitterness pressing against my chest. I had sacrificed not only money, but also my youth, my love, and my career, all to serve as the plan B for a family that consumed those sacrifices as if they were owed. Anger surged, but with it came a cold clarity. I could not go on like this anymore. I was not a bank, not an eternal lifeline. I was a human being and I deserved to live for myself. That night, I opened the transfer app, the one I had used for years to send money to my parents, and slowly pressed the button that said, "Cancel recurring transfer." Such a small action taking only seconds. Yet, it felt as though I had shattered chains that had bound me for 7 long years. I sat in silence, watching the screen go dark, and exhaled a long breath. My heart carried worry, even fear of what would come next, but alongside it flickered the faint light of freedom, just beginning to glow. 2 days later, the first message arrived. My mother wrote, "Olivia, the mortgage is due soon. Have you sent the money yet?" I read it but didn't reply. Hours later, my father called and left a voicemail. "Olivia, what are you doing? This house needs you. Don't let us suffer." His voice was deep and sharp, echoing with the authority of my childhood. And for the first time in my life, I pressed delete without saving it. Savannah texted too, her tone half scolding, half mocking. "What's wrong with you this time? Stop being dramatic. Mom and Dad are worried. Just send the money. You've got it, don't you?" I stared at the screen, my heart gone cold, then quietly turned off my phone. In the days that followed, the messages poured in like a storm. My mother wrote, "Don't let this small matter tear the family apart." My father wrote, "You're being selfish. This whole family has always relied on you. You have a responsibility." Savannah shifted tactics, moving from scolding to pleading. I really need you. If you don't help, I'll be evicted. How could you let that happen? I read them all, but I didn't reply. With every silence, I felt another layer of armor forming around my heart, my resolve growing stronger. On Friday night, I came home to my apartment, sat at my desk, and opened an empty notebook. On the first page, I wrote, "No more Plan B." Beneath it, I listed everything I needed to do for myself: save to buy my own home, spend time with real friends, take care of my health, enroll in the MBA program I had postponed. Each line was like a brick laid down to build the foundation of a new life. When I closed the notebook, I heard my heartbeat slow and steady. My parents might grow furious, Savannah might hate me, and I might lose the false peace I had clung to for years. But I knew that if I didn't stop now, I would lose myself forever, and I was no longer willing to pay that price for such ingratitude. A week after I stopped sending money, my phone rang constantly. My mother sent sweet messages. My father left voicemails heavy as hammers, and Savannah switched her tone back and forth, sometimes scolding, sometimes begging. I read, I listened, but I never responded. Then at the end of the week, my mother sent one short text: "Come home for dinner this Sunday. The family needs to talk." It wasn't an invitation. It was an order. I sat on the sofa, staring at the words glowing on my screen, my chest tightening. Part of me wanted to refuse, to never return to the place that had drained me. But another part urged me to go, to face it once and for all, rather than let the cycle drag on any longer. On Sunday evening, I drove back to Tacoma. The moment I stepped through the weathered wooden door, I could feel the heaviness in the air. The table was set with roast chicken and mashed potatoes, but the once comforting aroma now felt sharp and suffocating. My mother was arranging the silverware, her movements harsher than usual, as if even the plates had to carry her irritation. My father sat at the head of the table, arms crossed, his face cold as stone. Savannah leaned back in her chair with her arms folded, eyes glued to her phone, pretending indifference, though the curve of her lips carried a smug challenge. I pulled out a chair and sat down. No one spoke for several minutes, only the faint clinking of utensils breaking the silence. Then my mother's voice cut through, directed not at me, but at the food on her plate. "Olivia, this family cannot function without your contribution. You make good money. Helping is only natural. Your father and I sacrificed for you all these years. Now it's your turn to give back." What's wrong with that? I drew in a deep breath. If it had been me a year ago, I might have bitten my tongue, stayed quiet, and later slipped money into their account in secret. But now, after everything that had built up, I was no longer afraid. I looked straight at my mother, and each word I spoke dropped heavy like stone. "That's not helping. That's exploitation." The room froze. Savannah let out a short, mocking laugh, lifting her eyes from her phone, her gaze sharp with scorn. "Oh, please don't act so righteous. You've got money, but you're still single. I don't understand why you act so high and mighty. If I were you, I'd be embarrassed that no one even wants to marry me." A rush of heat rose in my chest, but I kept my voice steady, calm, without a tremor. "The difference is that I work for my money while you only know how to spend it. Without me, you would have lost your place to live a long time ago." My mother quickly interjected, her tone urgent. "Olivia, don't speak to your sister that way. She's still young. She hasn't found her footing like you have. You're the older sister. You have to be more forgiving." I turned, my eyes locked on Savannah, but my words were meant for the entire table. Forgiving doesn't mean letting people trample all over me. I'm not a bank. I'm not a bottomless wallet. All these years, I've stayed silent. I've given. And for what? To be mocked as a failure just because I'm not married. Savannah's face flushed red, her mouth opening as if to fire back. But before she could speak, my father slammed his hand against the table. The sharp crack made the silverware tremble. His glare bore into me, his voice a low growl. Watch your mouth. This is your home. You should know your place. You think you're so great. You only have money because your parents raised you. Don't forget where you came from. I pushed back my chair, the scrape of wood against the floor piercing the silence. My whole body trembled, but my voice was clear and resolute. If that's the case, then maybe I don't belong in this house. I've kept it standing, but all I've received in return is contempt. If you see me only as a wallet, then I'm sorry. I won't be here to be exploited any longer. The room fell into silence. My mother's mouth hung open, her eyes brimming with tears, as though she couldn't believe the once obedient daughter dared to push back. Savannah stared at me, her lips parting and closing again, unable to find words. My father's face was flushed with rage, but in his eyes, I caught a fleeting flicker, a shift that revealed even he knew I was no longer the same Olivia. I walked away from the table, grabbed my coat, and didn't look back. Each step felt like release, like tearing through an invisible chain that had bound me for 7 years. As the door slammed shut behind me, I heard my mother's voice calling after me, "Olivia, come back. We're family." But I didn't stop. For the first time, I let that call fade behind me, softer and softer, until all that remained was the pounding of my heart, the rhythm of a freedom just beginning to take shape. I drove through the night back to Seattle, my chest heavy yet alight. I knew I had severed a crucial tie and the road ahead would not be easy, but I also knew one thing with certainty. I was no longer my family's plan B. I was no longer the lifeline they could cling to. And from that moment on, I began reclaiming myself. A week after that confrontation, just as I was trying to keep my routine steady in the city, the real storm hit. It was a Friday afternoon when I received a large envelope from the bank delivered to my apartment. At first, I thought it was just another routine account statement. But the moment I tore open the seal, my hands turned cold. Inside was a thick packet of documents, its title printed in bold, Home Equity Line of Credit Agreement. I flipped quickly through the pages, my heart pounding. There it was, my name, Olivia Hart, listed clearly alongside my social security number, my address, and most shocking of all, a signature, a messy scroll, clearly an attempt to imitate mine. But I recognized it instantly. It wasn't mine. I stood frozen by the table as if someone had punched me hard in the stomach. They had done the one thing I feared most, but never truly believed they would dare. They had used my identity to borrow money. And not a small amount. Nearly $60,000 secured directly against the Tacoma house. I read more carefully and saw the signing date just 2 weeks earlier, only days after the dinner, where I declared I would no longer provide. The world seemed to collapse around me. This was no longer about being disrespected, no longer about cruel words or mocking laughter. This was outright betrayal. I remember sinking into a chair, the packet slipping from my hands, pages scattering across the floor like snow. In my mind, I saw their faces. My father with his stern expression and commanding voice, my mother with her wet eyes and pleading tone I knew too well, Savannah with her mocking smile. They had chosen to cross the final line, treating my signature as nothing more than a formality they could forge to save the house, the same house I had rescued from the bank time and time again. I gathered the pages one by one, my hands trembling. Part of me screamed, "They are my parents, my family." How could they do this? But another part colder answered, because they always have. Because for years they have treated me like a bottomless wallet. Because when I finally said no, they chose to break the law rather than look at themselves. The pain wasn't only in the massive debt now hanging over me. It was in the shattering of the fragile trust I had still held on to. That night, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I sat in my dark apartment, the only light, the street lamp spilling through the window. The packet lay squarely on the table like evidence of a crime. I picked it up, set it down, picked it up again, questions boiling inside me. How had they gone to the bank? Who had forged my signature? Did the banker know? And above all, had they even thought about the consequences for me? If this loan defaulted, my credit would be ruined, my chance to buy a home destroyed, even my career put at risk. The phone on the table buzzed again and again. A message from my mother. "Olivia, are you okay? Your father and I just managed a little something for the house. Don't stress. A message from my father. The bank has already taken care of it. No need for you to worry. We did this to keep the house." I stared at those words, my chest tightening. Not a single apology, not a single acknowledgement that they had forged my identity. Only smooth excuses. We did this for the family. I held my head in my hands as tears spilled out, not just from anger, but from the emptiness spreading through my chest. Family. The word I once trusted had now become the deepest knife. I remembered my childhood sitting in that Tacoma house, hearing my mother say, "Family is the place you can always trust completely." And now that place had turned me into a debtor on paper with a forged signature. In that moment, I knew there was no going back. This was no longer a quarrel between relatives, no longer just a few cruel words that left me hurt. This was a real crime, a betrayal that could never be justified. I felt something inside me shatter, but along with it came a cold clarity. I had to save myself. I carefully gathered the documents, stacked them neatly in a file folder, and slid it into my desk drawer. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat watching the blinking lights from the building across the street, hollow inside. My small apartment, once familiar, now felt foreign, as if I had stepped into a new world, one where family was no longer a refuge, but a lurking danger. I knew from this moment on everything had changed forever. When the clock struck 3 in the morning, I whispered a single sentence, etching it into my heart. They betrayed me, and I will never forget. On Monday morning, I pulled out my phone and dialed the bank's hotline. A woman's voice came through the line. "Wells Fargo. How can I help you today?" I tried to stay calm as I explained that my identity had been used to sign for a home equity loan I had never authorized. My voice trembled, but each word was clear and firm. On the other end, the representative listened carefully, occasionally interrupting with verification questions. After I finished, she paused for a moment before saying, "You need to contact our fraud investigation department immediately. And I strongly recommend you consult an attorney because this involves forgery and identity theft. This is a serious matter." I hung up, my hands still shaking. For a moment, it felt as though the weight of the world had grown heavier by tons. Yet, a small spark flickered inside me. For the first time, I could actually do something to protect myself instead of silently enduring. The next morning, I searched online for lawyers in Seattle who specialized in fraud and identity theft. One name appeared repeatedly alongside glowing reviews. Rachel Nguyen, a Vietnamese-American attorney who had handled numerous cases of families exploiting finances. I pressed call and scheduled an appointment. By Monday afternoon, I was walking into Rachel's office, a neat building near downtown. The space was filled with natural light, a polished wooden desk, and shelves lined with case files. Rachel looked to be in her early 40s, her black hair neatly pinned, her expression calm, but her eyes sharp. She shook my hand firmly and gestured for me to sit. I slid the forged documents across the desk. As Rachel flipped through each page, my heartbeat quickened, afraid she might see me as weak or foolish. But when she looked up, her voice was calm and steady. "Olivia, this isn't just wrong. This is a criminal act. forgery, fraud, identity theft. Your family has crossed the line from borrowing into breaking the law. I sat frozen, my heart jolting at the words criminal act, even though I already knew the truth. Hearing it declared so clearly made me tremble. Rachel continued, "You have the right to file a fraud report with the bank, the right to demand removal of liability from this loan, and if necessary, we can take this to court." I bit my lip, my voice raspy. But they're my parents and my sister. Rachel tilted her head, her eyes both firm and compassionate. I understand. But the fact that their family doesn't change the nature of what they've done. Olivia, you have the right to be protected. You cannot keep letting them trample your life and your future just because of the word family. I sat still, my hands clasped tightly together, my mind in turmoil. Part of me wanted to turn away, to stay silent again for the sake of peace. But the image of that forged signature, the $60,000 debt, and the cold tone of my parents justifying it kept flashing before me. And then I remembered sitting alone by Puget Sound, listening to the waves, realizing I was nothing more than a wallet to them. That feeling cut deep, like a blade twisting inside me. I knew that if I stayed silent this time, I would lose everything, not just money, but myself. I drew a deep breath, lifted my head, and looked straight at Rachel. "I won't stay silent anymore. Please help me." Rachel nodded, her face calm, but her eyes lit with conviction. "Well, start immediately. And Olivia, remember this. This time, you are not alone." Leaving Rachel's office, I stepped out into the street, the wind whipping hard against me, but inside, I felt clearer than ever. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with confrontation and bitterness, but I also knew that for the first time in years, I was choosing to stand up for myself, and this time, I would see it through to the end. That evening, after meeting with Rachel, I opened my laptop and for the first time didn't feel like someone cornered with no way out. I followed each step she had advised, freezing all my credit to prevent anyone from using my identity again, changing every password from emails to bank accounts to small things like Netflix and Amazon. Each time I typed in a new password, it felt like I was building another wall of protection around my life. Then I opened a brand new account at a different bank, one no one in my family knew about, and transferred most of my savings there. The relief of seeing my balance safe in a sealed space was indescribable, like regaining control that had been slipping through my fingers for years. It wasn't just about finances. I began thinking about myself differently. The next morning, instead of lying in bed until the last minute before rushing to the office, I signed up for a yoga class near my apartment. On the first day, my body was stiff, every stretch making sweat bead on my skin. But when I lay down on the mat and heard the instructor whisper, "Let go," tears slipped down my face. For so many years, I had only ever held everything in, never allowing myself to release. Alongside yoga, I started cooking for myself instead of living on takeout. Simple meals, pancered chicken, fresh salad. A small glass of wine gave my little apartment the feeling of a real home, not just a stopover for someone exhausted. At work, the change began to show, too. I poured my energy into a big project that had been left hanging for months. I stayed late, focused hard, and for the first time in years, I felt true excitement in what I was doing. One afternoon, my boss, Matthew, walked past my desk, paused, and placed his hand on the report I had just finished. "Excellent work, Olivia. I can see a real change in you." That brief compliment warmed me the entire day. I realized that when I was no longer drained dry by my family, I could shine in my own way. As I worked to rebuild my life, Rachel wasted no time. Just 2 days after our meeting, She sent a formal letter to the bank demanding an investigation into the forged signature. I was CC'd on the email, and when I saw the words suspected forgery printed clearly in black and white, I let out a long breath, part fear, part relief. It was no longer just a nightmare circling in my head. It had become a real case handled in a professional way. At the same time, I started a new habit, keeping every trace of contact from my family, my mother's messages from the sweet ones. Honey, this family needs you to the veiled threats. Without you, we'll lose everything. My father's voicemails, his voice heavy, sometimes menacing, sometimes pretending to be gentle. Savannah's texts shifting back and forth, sharp, "You're so selfish," then pleading, "Help me just this one last time. I promise I'll change." I saved them all, neatly organized in a folder labeled Evidence. Each time I read or listened again, the pain burned. But so did my resolve. They would never again have the chance to deny what they had done. And yet, in the quiet of certain nights, my heart still sank. I remembered family dinners filled with genuine laughter, my mother's warm hugs when I was a child, the way my father once held the bike steady as I learned to ride. But then the image of those forged documents would return, the endless, desperate calls echoing in my ears, reminding me that those beautiful memories were part of the past. Family was no longer a safe place. Family had become the very thing I had to defend myself against. Each morning I put on a new kind of calm. I walked into the office with steadiness, showed up to yoga with patience, and cooked myself dinner as if to remind myself, Olivia, you are worthy of care, too. And every evening, as the evidence folder grew heavier, I knew I was no longer just surviving. I was preparing for the day I would face them not as a walking wallet, but as a woman who knew her own worth. One night, I sat by the window, city lights reflecting off the glass, a cup of hot tea in my hands. I no longer felt the trembling, no longer felt the darkness swallowing me whole. Instead, I felt a patient waiting, a small flame burning steady. I whispered, "This time they will have to face me, and I will not step back." Rachel and I spent nearly a week pulling the case together. She guided me through gathering every piece of evidence: bank statements, transfer confirmation, emails, even the random receipts I had stuffed into drawers over the years. When the final tally appeared, 84,760 hours over 7 years, I sat stunned. Nearly 85,000, not a few hundred, not a few thousand. That was my youth. The vacations I never took, the dates I canceled, the promotions I passed over just to keep everything afloat. Rachel organized it all into a thick binder, each section marked with colored tabs: payment history, forged loan, Savannah's records. Inside were also Savannah's own defaults, canceled credit cards, overdue student loans, old eviction notices. Looking at those pages, I shivered as though staring into a mirror that stripped me bare, while at the same time realizing I was ready to hold that mirror up to them. On Sunday, I drove back to Tacoma. The house of my childhood still stood there with its peeling white fence and creaking wooden porch, but to me, it was no longer a place of safety. I walked in, binder clutched tightly in my hands. The air in the living room was heavy. My mother busied herself shuffling a stack of papers. Avoiding my eyes, my father sat in his armchair, his gaze dark. Savannah leaned against the wall, arms crossed, a half smile playing on her lips, defiant. I set the binder down on the wooden table, the thud landing like a hammer blow. "I'll be direct," I began, my voice so steady it surprised even me. "This is the full record of everything I've paid for this family over the last 7 years. Nearly $85,000. This is the evidence of the forged mortgage loan signed under my name. And these are Savannah's debt records." I flipped each tab, sliding the pages toward them. The three of them sat in silence. My father's brow furrowed as he prepared to speak, but I raised my hand to stop him. I am no longer this family's lifeline. From today, you have 30 days to remove my name from every loan, especially the home equity loan. If it's not done in 30 days, I will sue for forgery, financial fraud, and exploitation. I looked each of them in the eye, my mother shrinking back, Savannah paling, and my father gripping the arm of his chair. This is not a threat. This is an ultimatum. End of 4. The room was so silent, I could hear the clock ticking. Finally, my mother stammered, "Olivia, you can't do this. This is your home." I let out a short, cold laugh, harsher than I thought myself capable of. No. This is the house I've kept standing with my blood and sweat. But it's not my home anymore because the people inside it only ever saw me as an ATM. My father slammed his hand on the table. "That's how you speak to your parents." I stood, pulled the binder back into my arms, and said evenly, "I speak this way because it's the truth. 30 days. I won't repeat myself again." I turned and walked toward the door without looking back. The late Tacoma sky was heavy and gray, but inside I felt clearer than ever. No more trembling. No more guilt. Only the cold serenity of someone who had finally set down a burden carried for far too long. I drove back to Seattle, the wind rushing against the car windows as if it were washing away every wound. 2 weeks later, Rachel called. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the hint of relief. "The bank has finished the investigation. The signature was confirmed as forged. They will remove all legal liability from you." I sat frozen for a few seconds, my eyes stinging. Years of being dismissed, years of sacrifice that meant nothing. And now, at last, justice had taken my side. Rachel continued, "Olivia, you are officially free from that debt. From now on, they will have to carry it themselves." I looked out the window of my apartment. Seattle bathed in a warm, golden glow. In that moment, it felt like a chapter had closed. My family might still drown in their spiral of debt and lies, but I would not. I had chosen to stand up, to draw the line, to break free from invisible chains. And most of all, I knew I would never again step into the role of their emergency bank. Nah. That night, I opened a bottle of wine, sat on my balcony, and breathed in the crisp October air. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. The news that the Tacoma house was up for sale didn't come to me through a call or even a message from my family, but through the public real estate records Rachel had advised me to monitor. The image of the house appeared on the realtor's website, the weathered roof, the familiar wooden steps, but this time stamped with the bold red words "for sale." A strange wave rose inside me, a mix of sorrow and inevitability, as though I had known this ending was always coming. My parents couldn't refinance. After the forged signature was confirmed, the bank stood firm, and now the debt forced them to sell what I once thought would always be a place to return to. Savannah called me only once, her voice breaking. You really let it come to this? The house is gone. I don't know where to go." I sat in silence, listening to her sobs on the other end. Once I would have rushed to her side, handed her my bank card, and carried the weight myself. But this time, I only said softly, "Savannah, you have to learn to stand on your own. I can't keep doing it for you." Then I hung up, my chest aching, but lighter at the same time. A week later, my mother sent a message. "Sunday dinner. One last meal in the house. Can you come?" I hesitated, then agreed. Not because I felt responsible, but because I needed to see the chapter close with my own eyes. That evening, I drove to Tacoma for the last time. The house felt hollow, stripped of its life. Hallways stacked with cardboard boxes, the living room bare of furniture. only a few faded curtains still hanging loose. The air was so heavy, I could hear every clink of spoon against plate. My father sat silently, his hair grayer, his eyes dimmed as though the fire had gone out. My mother laid out a simple meal, nothing elaborate. Savannah said nothing. Her eyes rimmed red. Through the entire dinner, hardly anyone spoke. Only after the dishes were cleared did I finally break the silence, my voice steady without a trace of trembling. I'm not cutting ties. I'm still your daughter, still Savannah's sister. But I'm no longer the lifeline. From now on, if someone falls, they have to learn to stand on their own. My words echoed through the room, leaving all three of them stunned. No one argued, no one pleaded, only silence remained. I rose from my chair and walked into the hallway, my eyes passing over the labeled boxes. Kitchen, bedroom, books. So many childhood memories, once bound to duty and obligation, now packed into worn brown cardboard. I opened the door, drew a deep breath of Tacoma's cold night air, then turned back for one last word. I hope you all find a way forward, but I can't live your lives for you anymore. As I stepped down the porch steps, I knew I was leaving behind a piece of my youth. That house had held me in place with the invisible chains of obligation. Now it was gone, and the chains had broken with it. In the weeks that followed, I poured all my energy into work. The project I led exceeded every expectation, and during the quarterly meeting, my boss Matthew publicly said, "Olivia is the reason we achieved this breakthrough." A few months later, I received my promotion to senior product manager. For the first time in my life, my success wasn't overshadowed by desperate calls for money from my family. It was simply mine, earned by my own ability and my own resolve. Outside of work, I began rebuilding my personal life. I joined a Thursday night cooking class where I met new friends, people who didn't care how much money I had or whether I was single or married. They valued sincerity in the stories I shared. I joined a volunteer group at the community center helping kids learn STEM. Every time I saw their eager faces holding the little robots they had built with their own hands, I felt the true meaning of giving, not through money exploited from me, but through time and heart. I also started caring for myself in small but meaningful ways, jogging around Green Lake on weekends, spending afternoons reading at a cafe, cooking myself a good dinner in the evenings, then calling friends just to laugh and talk. I was no longer haunted by the flood of desperate messages from my family. My phone was quiet now, and that silence was the most beautiful music I had ever known. One December evening, I stood on my apartment balcony, Seattle glowing beneath me, the city lights shimmering on the water like countless stars. I took a sip of wine, breathed in the crisp air, and smiled softly. Not the smile of a victor, but the smile of someone who had finally found herself again. The message rang clearly in my heart as if written there. Your value does not lie in being everyone else's lifeline. It lies in standing strong on your own and keeping close only those who truly cherish you. And I knew from that moment on that would be the compass guiding my life.